The system that taught you to solve problems was never designed to teach you to solve problems. One man proved it by doing something nobody else on a government commission bothered to do. He actually read the textbooks. 1964, Pasadena, California. Richard Feynman sits alone in his study. Around him, 17 feet of textbooks, 300 pounds of them. Every single math book being considered for California's public schools. He's the only person on the entire state commission who's reading them. And what he finds confirms what you've suspected since your first year on the job. The system trained you to memorize answers, not by accident. The state of California required every public school textbook to be approved by a curriculum commission. Feynman got recruited. So he had all the books delivered to his house. He built a special shelf just to hold them. Then he started reading. Every page, every chapter, every problem set. He was the only commissioner who did. The other commissioners handed the books off to local teachers. Got reports back. Averaged the numbers. Nobody was engaging with the material. They were processing paperwork. And then Feynman discovered something that should have ended careers. One publisher had missed the submission deadline. So they sent their book to the commission with just the covers. Nothing inside. Completely blank between the front and back. The book depository forwarded it along with everything else. That blank book received ratings from the other commissioners. Not low ratings. The blank book scored slightly higher than the same publisher's 2 completed textbooks. Commissioners who never opened it assigned it a number. The averaging system did the rest. And nobody noticed. Because nobody was looking. As Feynman later wrote in Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, the averaging process hid the most important fact. There was nothing inside the book. The people choosing what your children learn couldn't tell the difference between a real textbook and an empty one, because they never checked. But the blank book wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what was inside the books that weren't blank. Feynman found a first-grade science textbook that opened with pictures of a wind-up toy dog, a real dog, and a motorcycle. Under each picture, the same question. What makes it move? The answer, printed in the teacher's edition, was 3 words. Energy makes it move. That answer enraged Feynman. In his 1966 address to the National Science Teachers Association, he tore it apart. Saying energy makes it move is no different from saying God makes it move, or movability makes it move. It's a tautology, a word dressed up as an explanation. The child learns nothing about the toy, nothing about gears, nothing about springs, nothing about how anything actually works. He proposed a test, a brutal one, without using the word energy. Tell me what you know now about the dog's motion. You can't, because nothing was taught, only a word was transferred. Feynman's alternative was simple. Take apart the toy. Show the child the cleverness of the gears. Show the ratchets. Let them see how a spring stores force and releases it. That's understanding. That's the moment a child actually learns what science is. But that approach has a problem. A child who takes apart a toy dog and sees how it works is a child who starts asking questions. Why does the spring push back? What if I change the gear? What happens if I build my own? And a child who asks questions is a child who's harder to manage. In that same speech, Feynman gave another example. Ask a child why shoe leather wears out. The textbook answer? Friction. The real answer, the one that actually teaches something, is that the sidewalk has tiny bumps and notches, and as your shoe drags across them, they grab little pieces of leather and tear them off. One answer is a word. The other is knowledge. The system chose the word, every time. And I'd bet you have your own version of this, a moment in school or at work where someone handed you a label instead of an explanation? If you remember it, drop it in the comments. The textbooks flooding California schools were obsessed with precise language and formal definitions. Set theory notation, the difference between a number and a numeral, without teaching a single useful idea. Feynman wrote that the elaborate notation for sets in these books almost never appears in theoretical physics, in engineering, in business, in computer design, or anywhere mathematics is actually used. And publishers had every reason to keep it that way. One sent Feynman a leather briefcase with his name engraved in gold. Another sent a Thanksgiving gift basket through Western Union. They waited in hotel lobbies to take commissioners to dinner. The system served the people inside it, not the students. Now, if Feynman had only seen this in California, you could call it a local problem, a bad commission, a corrupt decade. But he'd already seen it on the other side of the world. In 1951, Feynman spent a sabbatical teaching physics at an engineering school in Brazil. He quickly noticed something strange. He could ask a question and get an immediate, confident answer. Then he'd rephrase the exact same question, same topic, same concept, and the entire room went silent. The students had memorized everything. They didn't understand any of it. So Feynman did something their education had never included. He taught them to solve problems through trial and error. Estimate first. Before you touch a formula, guess what the answer might be. Then calculate. Compare your guess to your result. Refine, repeat. The students had never seen this. Not once. Their training was memorize the formula, plug in the numbers, write the answer. If the question came in, a form they hadn't memorized, they were helpless. Feynman wrote in Surely You're Joking that their knowledge was so fragile, the wrong entrance clue made everything useless. They were like books. Look in the index under the right keyword and you get the answer. But search a different keyword for the same concept? Nothing. At the end of that year, Feynman gave a speech to the students, the professors, and government officials. He told them their entire education system was producing people who could pass exams, but couldn't do science. The room went silent. Then a senior professor stood up and said, "I came here knowing we have some sickness in our system of education. What I have learned is that we have a cancer." And then the real shock. The only two students who had actually performed well in Feynman's class stood up. One said he'd been educated in Germany. The other said the same. Neither had gone through the Brazilian system. The professor who'd done well said he'd learned everything by reading alone, because during the war, all the professors had left. 100% failure. Not 90, not 80. Every single person who succeeded had learned outside the system. Feynman essentially asked, who wants such a student to work in a plant when a book, requiring no food or maintenance, stands day after day, always ready to give the same answers? Because now, we don't just have books standing ready with adequate answers. We have AI. And AI does exactly what those Brazilian students did. It pattern matches at a scale no human can touch. It has read every textbook ever written. It can recite every formula ever published. It produces fluent answers to any question that's been answered before. But ask it something nobody's answered yet, and it stalls. Ask it to diagnose a machine it's never encountered. Ask it to solve a problem where the data contradicts the textbook. It can't. Because it doesn't understand anything. It memorized everything. And now that gap has a price tag. The memorizer can be replaced by a machine. The person who can think from scratch can't. Now here's where this gets personal. You've been in the meeting. Someone presents a deck. Beautiful slides. Data on every page. Then a senior person asks a question that isn't on any of the slides. The room goes quiet. The presenter shuffles back through the pages, looking for an answer that isn't there. They say, "I'll have to get back to you on that." But you both know, they won't get back because they can't. The answer requires understanding the problem, not just knowing the slides. That's not a performance failure. That's a system failure. That person was trained to memorize the deck, not to understand the problem behind it. You've watched credentials get promoted over competence more times than you can count. And every time, you sensed something was wrong, but couldn't quite name it. Feynman named it. In 1974, he stood in front of Caltech's graduating class and gave them a warning disguised as a story. He told them about islands in the South Pacific. During World War II, American military forces built airstrips on these islands. Planes landed, supplies arrived. Food, equipment, technology. The islanders saw wealth appear out of the sky. When the soldiers left, the islanders wanted the planes back. So they built runways out of dirt, carved headphones out of wood, made bamboo antennas, put a man in a hut waving landing signals. Everything looked right. The form was perfect. But no planes landed. Feynman called it cargo cult science. And then he delivered a line that cuts through every boardroom, every classroom, and every credential on Earth. He said the islanders did everything right. Every visible step was correct. What they missed was the invisible thing. The thing that actually makes planes land. And he warned those graduates. Most of what passes for science, for education, for expertise, has exactly the same problem. As he told those graduates, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. That's what was removed from the textbooks. Not a chapter, not a formula, a way of thinking. The habit of checking whether you actually understand something, or whether you've just memorized the shape of the answer. Every story, California, Brazil, the cargo cult islands, pointed to the same question. If the system is broken, what does the alternative actually look like? So, what did Feynman actually do differently? How did he think? Mathematician Giancarlo Rota described it in a 1996 lecture. He said Feynman kept a dozen of his favorite problems constantly present in his mind. Most of the time they sat dormant, but every time he encountered a new trick, a new result, a new idea from any field, physics, music, lockpicking, anything, he tested it against those problems. Every once in a while there was a hit, a connection nobody else saw, and people would say, "How did he do it? He must be a genius." He wasn't a genius in the way people mean. He had a system. 12 open questions, always running in the background, always filtering new information through real problems he cared about. His list ran from nuclear fission timing to bongo rhythms, physics next to music, engineering next to art. Here's how it worked in practice. Feynman was sitting in a cafeteria at Cornell when he saw someone throw a plate in the air. The plate wobbled as it spun. Most people would have ignored it, but Feynman had open problems about the motion of spinning objects. So he played with the equations. He figured out the relationship between the wobble and the spin rate. That playful calculation led him back to the equations of electron orbits, which eventually contributed to the work that won him the Nobel Prize. A spinning plate in a cafeteria, connected to a problem he was already carrying. That's not luck. That's what happens when you keep your questions alive. That's the part they don't teach. Keep your real problems alive. Don't file them away. Don't delegate them to somebody else's framework. Carry them with you. Test everything you learn against them. Write yours down tonight. Not goals, Not KPIs, problems. The real ones you keep circling back to. The ones you think about in the shower but never put on paper. That list is the starting point. And when you face one of those problems, Feynman's move was always the same. Strip away the official wording. Look at the thing itself. Ask, what can I actually check? What do I know for certain? Not because someone told me, but because I can verify it with my own eyes. If the answer is nothing, start there. Not from the textbook, not from the last person's framework, from nothing. Next time someone in a meeting says, "We've always done it this way," that's textbook thinking. Ask, what would we do if we were starting from scratch? That single question changes the room. And before you reach for the formula, estimate. That's what Feynman taught those engineers in Brazil. Guess what the answer should roughly be. Then calculate. If your formula gives you something 10 times larger than your gut sense, something's wrong. And it's probably the formula, not your gut. The mechanic who listens to an engine before opening the manual. The engineer who sketches a solution on a napkin before opening the software. They're all doing the same thing Feynman did, starting from observation, trusting what they can see and hear over what someone else wrote down. The reason you always felt out of step with the system is because the system was designed to produce the opposite of you. It produces people who follow the process perfectly, right up until reality changes, and then they freeze. You've seen it in hiring. The candidate with the perfect resume who can't answer a simple what-if question in the interview. You've seen it in leadership. The director who can quote the strategy deck word for word, but goes blank when a client throws a curveball. The system trained them to memorize the runway, not to fly the plane. Feynman left behind the method the system tried to bury. 12 problems, always alive. Strip every claim down to what you can check. Estimate before you calculate. Test your understanding by rephrasing the question. If you can't answer it in different words, you never understood it in the first place. That's it. That's what they removed. And now you have it back. But Feynman's war on the textbooks exposed something bigger than bad education. He found the same pattern in science, in hiring, in the way entire industries collapse when nobody inside them can think from scratch. And when he called it out by name, in front of the most powerful people in the room, they didn't thank him. That's a story for another time.